Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're throwing on our detective hats to decode a seriously fascinating lecture by Dr. David Bauer on inductive Bible study. We're going to dive specifically into the first chapter of the book of James. Why? Because we're going to uncover a masterful hidden blueprint that is literally hiding right there in plain sight.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll look at the mystery of James 1, decode its hidden structure, grab our 5 tools for close reading, zoom in on verses 5 through 8, and finally meet the double-minded doubter. We're going to start with a broad satellite view of the text and then zoom all the way down into the grammatical microscope. Let's get into it.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the mystery of James, chaos or masterpiece.
If you've ever just sat down and read the first chapter of James, you know it can feel, well, kind of chaotic, right? You might legitimately ask yourself, is this just a random brain dump of disconnected thoughts? I mean, on the surface, the author jumps erratically from enduring trials to the passing away of wealth, right into avoiding deception, without much obvious logic tying it all together. But Dr. Bauer points out that if we conduct a careful segment survey, something incredible emerges, a totally brilliant, deeply intentional hidden blueprint.
Which brings us to Section 2. Decoding the hidden structure, taking the macro view. So if we pull out our textual telescope and look at the whole board, we can actually split this chapter right down the middle into 2 distinct halves. On the left, verses 2 through 15 are hyper-focused on enduring trials and temptations, using wisdom as the primary tool. On the right, verses 16 through 27 are tightly bound by a completely different but related theme, avoiding deception by embracing the word. So we definitely don't have random thoughts here. We have 2 massive, deliberate thematic blocks.
Now, the real genius is what connects them. The crucial point linking these 2 halves is what we call the hinge, right in the middle, spanning verses 12 to 18. This section draws a massive line in the sand about exactly what God does and does not give to humanity. He does not give temptation, which perfectly wraps up that first half about trials, but he does give every good and perfect gift, specifically the gift of the word. And boom, that launches us perfectly into the second half's theme. It's honestly a masterclass in structural writing.
Moving right along to Section 3, 5 tools for close reading, our detective's toolkit. To get from that huge macro view down into the microscopic details, we need to equip ourselves with 5 essential tools of detailed observation. Number 1 is terminal. That's digging into specific words and their roots. Number 2 is grammatical, how syntax wires those words together. 3 is structural, spotting relationships like cause and effect. 4 is logical, analyzing the core meaning or the issue at stake. And finally, contextual, examining how a verse actually fits in with its immediate neighbors. To see how powerful this can be, look at this brilliant example of logical observation from John chapter 9 with the blind man. The disciples ask a question that is entirely stuck on limited human cause. Who sinned, this man or his parents? But Jesus flips the whole script. He shifts the entire logical focus over to expansive divine purpose, that the works of God might be made manifest. Catching that one logical shift, from cause to purpose, completely transforms how you read the entire passage.
All right, Section 4. Zooming in on verses 5 through 8. Let's apply this microscope.
We are going to test these analytical tools straight on James chapter 1. The passage begins, "If anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask God." Right off the bat, our grammatical observation tool highlights a highly specific causal relationship hiding in this exact phrasing.
The phrase, "if anyone lacks wisdom," is what grammar nerds call a first-class conditional statement. Now, don't let the technical jargon throw you off. It basically just means it features an if clause, the cause, and a guaranteed then clause, the effect. Meaning, our human lack of wisdom is the direct cause that should automatically trigger the resulting effect of asking God for help. It is a built-in, automatic problem and solution structure right there in the grammar.
And what happens when we actually ask? Well, we're met with a very specific kind of divine response. The verse continues, "Who gives to all men generously and without reproaching, and it will be given him." This brings us to a super crucial terminal observation about how God actually operates. The Greek root word translated as generously here is haplos. And here's the thing, it reveals that God's giving is not just generous in quantity. It means giving that is entirely single-minded, extravagant, and completely free of reluctance. He isn't holding back or rationing it out. He is fundamentally single-minded in his generosity toward us.
Which brings us to our final stop, Section 5, the double-minded doubter, the ultimate contrast. Because God's single-minded generosity actually demands a very specific human response from us. James writes, "But let him ask in faith, with no doubting." If we apply our logical observation here, we see a massive warning against an attitude of presumption toward God. It's not enough to just ask. The mode and mindset you bring to the table matters immensely. And this is where a terminal observation strikes absolute gold. James describes the doubter as double-minded. The Greek root here is dipsukos, which literally translates to double-souled. Think about that for a second. Double-souled. It paints this really visceral, painful picture of someone being totally ripped apart by internal struggles and opposing beliefs. When we map the structure out, the duality is just mind-blowing. On one side, you have the divine giver, absolutely single-minded, unwavering, giving to all. On the exact opposite side, you have the human doubter, double-minded or double-souled, unstable in all his ways, and as the text brutally points out, going to receive absolutely nothing. It is the perfect structural contrast, divine stability versus human instability. To really hammer this instability home, the text uses a powerful, explicit comparison. It says, "For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind." And our final grammatical clue is tucked right into the words driven and tossed. Those verbs use a passive inflection. What does that mean? It proves that the double-minded person has completely lost their agency. Just like a wave doesn't decide to move itself but is violently pushed around by the wind, the divided person has totally surrendered their control to uncontrollable outside forces. So ultimately, all of this deep textual detective work leaves us with a really profound question. What actually happens when we approach life's greatest trials with a divided mind? Dr. Bauer's incredible breakdown shows us that this text isn't just dusty, ancient advice. It's actively forcing us to evaluate how our own internal stability dictates our ability to survive the storms of life. Are we anchored in single-minded trust, or are we double-souled, just waiting to get tossed by the next wind? Something to chew on. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep observing closely.